What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another top 5 video. In today's top 5 video, we are going over the top 5 early round targets that you should be targeting in your drafts. And just a spoiler alert, there are no quarterbacks and no tight ends, as you know we tell you to avoid those. Oh yeah, no kickers or defenses either. Shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, but before we get into today's video, if you haven't yet checked out our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, you should go check it out today and download our rankings. If you haven't been on there in a while, the rankings are probably updated. You should update them as well. And if you really want to prepare yourself for your draft, go ahead and become a premium member and we will shoot you over the premium rankings list, and the benefits span up until draft day and all the way into the season. We do also have a special promotion going on with Pro Football Focus, the leader in statistics for the NFL, which is 12.5% off of their edge packages and 10% off of their elite packages. Set yourself ahead of your competition this year in your fantasy leagues and get yourself a copy. Information for that is in the link in the description box below. With all that being said, let's get into the top 5 early round targets that you should be looking for in your drafts. So to start this list, we have a player who's been fantasy relevant for a number of years. He's been a first round pick, he's been a second round pick, he's been all across the board, and this is Demaryius Thomas of the Denver Broncos. In ESPN, he is currently coming off the board 29th overall as wide receiver 13. That may seem pretty pricey considering last season he did finish as wide receiver 16, and essentially if you're drafting him as wide receiver 13, you're saying in order to return value he has to improve on his stats from last season. The thing is, last season was essentially his floor. And a good thing about Demaryius Thomas and his floor is that out of all players being drafted around him, he literally has one of the safest floors you can ask for. To name a few players that have just huge question marks, we have T.Y. Hilton, Dez Bryant, Brandon Cooks, and DeAndre Hopkins. All those players have a higher ceiling, but not one of them has a higher floor. Only 2 other wide receivers in the second round or later do, and that's probably Michael Thomas, coming in at wide receiver 7, so you're paying a hefty price for him. And then Doug Baldwin at wide receiver 11, who's also a fantastic pick with a safe floor as well, coming in right around the same area as him. One thing about Thomas, though, is that he was top 10 in the league in targets, and that's just something that's not going to change. Literally in half of his games, he received 10 or more targets. So if you're in a PPR format, can you ask for a safer pick in this range? And even though more recently, unlike a little earlier in his career, he's been known as kind of this safe player, he still does have a chance to improve on his numbers from last season. Only 69% of his passes were deemed catchable, and one thing that's really going to benefit him this year is another year of chemistry with Trevor Siemian. He's already been named the starter, and we are definitely going to see more efficiency in the passing game as a whole. Another thing you may not know is that he did only have 5 touchdowns, but he was actually 8th in the league in red zone targets. He had more red zone targets than players like Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, and even Antonio Brown. This is a player that you can expect to continue that trend. He's going to be heavily targeting the red zone. He's 6'3", 230 pounds, and one thing he's been known about throughout his entire career is being able to come down with those contested catches. So if you're in the 3rd round and you're on the clock and you see Demaryius Thomas there, he is definitely a great piece to add, especially as a wide receiver too, to put a nice baseline of points on your team week over week. Now, the next player we're going to be talking about may come as a lot more of a surprise, and that's Mark Ingram of the New Orleans Saints. He's coming in at the biggest value out of all the players we're going to be talking about, and in ESPN, he comes off the board 57th overall at RB22. Ingram has certainly been one of those players that is quickly shot up our rankings. He's a player who was an RB2 in 2015 despite only playing in 12 games and finished as an RB8 in 2016. There really shouldn't be much more that he has to do to prove to you that he's a fantasy asset. He has had over 1,000 scrimmage yards in each of the past 3 seasons, averaging 8 touchdowns per season through that span. The only real knock that you should have on him this year is that the backfield is beginning to get crowded. While the level of talent is definitely higher than it has been in recent years, the Saints have always used a committee approach. They've even used this same committee approach even during the past 3 seasons where Ingram has had over 1,000 scrimmage yards in each of them. There certainly will be a rotation and definitely regression in receptions. That's going to be inevitable, considering that in the past 2 seasons he's had 96 of them. But that's mostly because Alvin Kamara has come in, and to be quite fair, Alvin Kamara has looked like a beast in preseason. He will get a fair share of targets. One thing we do know for sure about Kamara, though, is that he has been marked as inconsistent coming out of college as a pass blocker. That's something that Mark Ingram is really strong in. in. If Kamara struggles in this aspect of his game, that may not make Kamara a lock to be in every third and long situation. As for the first and second down work, he will be battling Peterson, and as we also know, Peterson is seriously a huge injury risk. There is no way that he is a safe bet to even finish the season healthy. He's 32, and we all know the Saints are probably tied for third at best in the division on this season. So there's also that chance that he retires in the beginning of the season, similar to something that we saw in Arian Foster last season. If they rack up some losses earlier on, I could see a situation like that potentially unfolding. Don't get me wrong though, we are still completely fine with taking mid-round flyer picks on Peterson because he is a freak of nature after all. But Ingram has had fantasy success in crowded backfields, and this year should be no different. You're getting him at a discount. He's coming off the board at RB22, being drafted around guys with much more question marks than him. We know that Ingram's going to play a role in one of the most high-powered offenses in the league. Some of you may have already written Ingram off, but that would be a mistake. Target him if you can, and you're getting him at a discount. Now, the next player we have is Larry Fitzgerald of the Arizona Cardinals. He's coming in at a great discount as well. ESPN has him ranked 43rd overall, wide receiver 19. What more is needed to be said? He has posted back-to-back 100 reception seasons. His season-ending numbers are definitely not spectacular because he really slowed down towards the tail end of the season. His only 3 single-digit fantasy performances of the year came in the final 6 games, and excluding week 17, he hadn't even scored a touchdown since week 5. Don't let that be the reason you don't draft him. In the first 9 games, he averaged 18.6 PPR points. Odell Beckham on the season last year averaged 18.5. Larry Fitzgerald will be a wide receiver 1, maybe even top 5 in the first 6 weeks of the season. The Cardinals play the Lions, the Colts, the Cowboys, the 49ers, and then the Eagles. If that's not one of the easiest passing schedules that you have heard of in the first 6 weeks, then please let me know. Then, not even to mention John Brown still can't even stay healthy, and now Michael Floyd is gone. They really have nobody to throw to at this point. And while David Johnson will be a beast, Larry Fitzgerald is going to be heavily used in this offense. I think we all can admit that last year was an off year for Palmer as a whole. Fitzgerald actually saw more targets in 2016, but saw less receptions, yardage, and touchdowns. I definitely expect a slight increase in each category. Even with the regression in 2016 that he had from 2015 in all categories, Fitzgerald still managed a wide receiver 11 finish in PPR formats. He's going off the board as wide receiver 19. How does that even make sense? A huge knock was the touchdown. I told you how he didn't score many at all towards the end of the season. He finished the year with 6, but oddly enough, Fitzgerald still remained in the top 10 in red zone targets in the league. He will yet again find himself in 2017 in the top 10 in red zone targets, and if Palmer can remain healthy all season, his numbers could trend closer to that of 2015. Even if they didn't, would any of you really be disappointed if you got Fitzgerald and he provided you with the same value that he gave last season? He led the league in receptions and was a back-end wide receiver 1. Based on his current draft capital, it would essentially make him a steal. Yes, he is another year older, but he still passes the eye test in every way. Look to target him in the early rounds. He is sure to exceed value, especially to start the season. The next player we have on this list is Doug Baldwin of the Seattle Seahawks. If you've been following the channel for a long time, you know we love Baldwin this year. ESPN has Baldwin 23 overall, wide receiver 11. And one thing about Baldwin is he has been extremely underrated the past 2 seasons, and I still think people are apprehensive about grabbing him this year. There are a number of contributing factors to that opinion. First of all, that being that Baldwin plays better as the season wears on. Basically the exact opposite of Larry Fitzgerald, who we just talked about. But if you really think about it, is that really a bad thing? Championship weekend, he put up 36.7 PPR fantasy points against a stout Cardinals defense. The prior year championship weekend, he put up 25.8. Would it surprise you if I told you that Baldwin was on over 20% of championship teams this year, and that he was on 24.3% of championship teams in 2015 also? Theoretically, if Baldwin gets off to a slow start, you could trade Larry Fitzgerald for him after week 7 or 8 and end up with probably a top 5 wide receiver between the two. Another thing about Baldwin is he does get a rap for not having a very high ceiling, but that's because he just has such a safe floor. He only had 5 games under double-digit fantasy points and only 1 coming in the final 9 games. That game was in week 17. You should be taking advantage of the misconception that he doesn't have a high ceiling. He had 4 games over 20 fantasy points, which is more than Brandon Cooks, even tied with Michael Thomas and Amari Cooper. both players being drafted ahead of Baldwin. Last season, people said Baldwin was going to be a bust because he got 14 touchdowns, most of which came in the final stretch of the season. Now this year, people are saying Baldwin only played well because Seattle had to throw more this year because Wilson was hurt. Yes, Wilson was hurt, but Baldwin played much better when Wilson was more mobile and healthier. Also, the fact that they had no run game last season, their run game shouldn't be any more improved this season than it was before. They still have a terrible offensive line, and if we really believed in this run game, don't you think there would be a Seattle RB being drafted in any reasonable early round? It's truly going to be a mess back there. Don't let the fact that Baldwin has been relatively cheap in previous years compared to this year's draft price, don't let that scare you off of him. He has been winning championships for people for years now, and this year should be no different. Now, the last player we're going to talk about should be one you all knew was coming, and that's Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. He's currently coming in ESPN 46 overall, RB 18. This is one player we hadn't really touched on much this season and is quickly climbing up our draft boards. From the signing of Latavius Murray to the concerns of the O-line, we didn't feel comfortable labeling Cook as a solid pick. Things have changed, and Cook is definitely the guy. If you have been following the channel for a while, you do know that we have never been fans of Latavius Murray for years now. Clearly, the signing was a knee-jerk reaction to not having an RB on the team besides McKinnon. Let's be honest though, the free agent backs this season were anything but spectacular, and I guess Latavius Murray was really the best that they could possibly get. As for Cook though, I had him as a first-round grade coming out of college. He did have a poor combine, which was definitely concerning, but even with that, I didn't expect him to slip into the second round. He is a talented player. This is a player who amassed 5,400 total yards in just 3 years with Florida State, while averaging 6.5 yards per carry. The Vikings moved up to get him, and while Murray is still getting paid, it's clear that Cook is their future and he will be getting his opportunity. So far this preseason, Cook has looked really good. He did have trouble getting it done on the ground in his first game, going 5 for 13 against Buffalo. While it definitely isn't something to get excited about, he did have 4 receptions for 30 yards. That just goes to show you that he will be used in the passing game, and that stat line in limited opportunity was already good for over 8 PPR fantasy points. Then moving over to his second preseason game against Seattle, he looked much better, going 7 for 40 yards, including a 15-yard scamper up the middle, finally being taken down by Earl Thomas in the secondary. Don't forget, this was against Seattle's first team defense nonetheless. He definitely passed the eye test, and one thing overall was that he had really good ball carrier vision on a subpar offensive line. I can see big things coming from this kid, and I don't think a poor offensive line will hold him back all that much. I think if anything, it will probably give him more opportunities because Latavius Murray definitely will struggle against this line, and then Dalvin Cook will get his opportunities and average more yards per carry and be much more successful, thus giving him more opportunities in the future, and Latavius Murray a smaller and smaller role. As for fantasy, Cook is currently going off the board as RB 18, which I really only see increasing, so hopefully if you draft this weekend, grab him as early as possible. I have been seeing people draft him in the second round. Our current ranking has him as a back-end RB1, top-end RB2, just behind Crowell and Gurley. We would still take him over Elliott at this point with the 6-game suspension, and also ahead of Fournette. So we're going to suggest that you try grabbing him as late as possible, since you may want to try to get a deal based on his current ADP, but with his performances in preseason, you may not get the chance. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this week's top 5 video on the top 5 players to target early in your drafts. If you like this video, please toss it a big thumbs up. If you're new, make sure to subscribe. Go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. We thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed, and we will catch you on the next one.